Gentle lady viewers and gentlemen viewers, hello and welcome to this program. My name is Jim Molia, and before you ask yourself who is he, here is an answer even if you did not pose the question. Or to quote Shakespeare, ask me what question thou canst possible, and I will answer unpremeditated. Of that image, or rather mnemonic frame, that I briefly showed, we will talk later, but let's not jump the gun, as they say. For those who cannot resist the temptation of knowing who is who and what is this video about, one way would be to connect to the website yourdailysshakespeare.com and from there to choose the option about the author, therefore reaching the appropriate page. From that page, or resume, or curriculum, I will just extract two items, which is often customary to include, for example, when applying for employment, namely strengths and weaknesses of the applying candidate, that is. In a similar way, I'm applying here for your attention. My strengths, you will find, they consist in an irresistible passion for what is totally, utterly, and incontrovertibly useless. And as for my weaknesses, the entry says, take your pick. From all this, you may gather that I am not very fond of formalities in general, and of questionable formalities in particular. Describing one's own strength may be an unavoidable necessity. However, in a turbulent and questionable environment ridden with false promises and exaggerated claims, a certain reluctance to join the crowd, so to speak, is perhaps understandable. Anyway, I can be described as a writer, and in the context of this video, I am the author of this book titled Your Daily Shakespeare, an arsenal of verbal weapons to drive your friends into action and your enemies into despair, as well as of this fresh new book internet combination titled Shakespeare in Pictures, The Psychology and Magic of Memory, with subtitle Harness the Power of Mnemonic Frames to Memorize Scores of Shakespearean Quotations. Now, the book internet may sound cryptic, and the short clarification is necessary. Because the book internet combo, the Shakespeare in Pictures, though totally independent from the Your Daily Shakespeare dictionary, derives from it logically and historically, as I will briefly describe here. The Your Daily Shakespeare dictionary is the only situational dictionary of Shakespeare's work. Nothing like this has ever been compiled. It took 15 years of work to make Shakespeare accessible and, yes, positively profitable for everyone. But what does situational mean? For one, it means that all entries are listed by situation. And what is a situation? A situation clearly is a combination of specific circumstances occurring at a certain moment. Circumstances which anyone may encounter during the conduct of life. For example, being asked a question and needing to give an answer, being hot, cold, dealing with an obnoxious person, addressing a fascinating woman, and so forth. And the dictionary lists over 10,000 everyday life situations connected with an appropriate Shakespearean quote. I will give you one brief example in a moment so as to descend from theory to practice. Your Daily Shakespeare is the only dictionary of this type ever compiled, produced and published since Shakespeare left us for the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns. And for each entry you have the situation, the quote, suggestions for use, and a brief description of the context in which the quote appears in the related play, poem, or sonnet. For example, situation, character, pompous, dealing with a vain character, and the quote, let him fear this, for it will come to pass that every braggart shall be found an ass. Application: whisper quietly as a comment to a boring and a tedious speaker, or explain why you do not want to advertise your merits, for it will come to pass, etc., etc. And finally, in the play, the pompous character called Paroles has been unmasked and reflects on his own undoing, and so forth. And this is the first part of the dictionary. The second part consists of an analytical index listing, as I said, over 10,000 situations that you may encounter in your daily life, and each connected to one or more applicable Shakespearean quotes. Your daily Shakespeare has readers and users all over the world. Of course, the merit is not mine, for I ride on the shoulders of a giant, and I don't need to explain why a Shakespearean quote can have an immediate and powerful effect on just about any audience. In fact, I receive regularly letters from users of the dictionary, and I will quote just a recent one from a reader in Florida who, finding himself in a restaurant with his colleagues and being offered the option of a Thai dish, that is, a dish from Thailand, he replied, "On what I hate, I feed not," a quote from the play Timon of Athens, and he wrote back to me saying that the whole company burst out in laughter. And, for the record, he ordered another copy for his daughter, who is in college at the moment in Montreal. The quote appears in the dictionary as follows: situation: food, fast food, distasteful fast food. Quote: on what I hate, I feed not. Application: answer to let's have a bite as at a fast food restaurant or any restaurant the food of which you dislike. And in the play, the character Epaminondas, a friend of Timon, visits Timon in his cave, offers him a curious fruit, and Timon refuses it with these words, that is, on what I hate, I feed not. Now, consider all I said so far as a necessary introduction to the next book, or rather book-internet combination, which, as I said, is called Shakespeare's in Pictures, the Psychology and Magic of Memory, harness the power of mnemonic frames to memorize scores of Shakespearean quotations. Shakespeare in Picture is, as I said, a book-internet combination, meaning that it consists of a traditional printed book and an internet file that you can easily connect to by scanning a code in the book with your phone or just type in the internet address. The book gives useful information not only about the mnemonic frames, of which I will tell you more later, but especially useful for those who intend to effectively incorporate into their speaking assets, so to speak, a number of Shakespearean quotes to be delivered as the occasion demands in speech or in writing. For, let me tell you, having in mind or at hand a good number of Shakespearean quotes to be added to a presentation or to a letter or to a speech or even during a job interview is a valuable and usable asset. In fact, the book contains a section specifically dedicated to job interviews. Again, depending of course on the position one may be applying for, a Shakespearean quote delivered at the right time or as an answer to a question can immediately add a few positive points to a candidate standing for obvious reasons. Why? Because of itself it shows that the applicant has a command or at least an appreciation for language besides being original. For statistically, not many take the initiative to memorize Shakespearean quotes other than perhaps to be or not to be. And even if elegant and persuasive language may seem unnecessary, that is not true. People know good language when they hear it, and very often the good Shakespearean line leaves a durable impression in the mind, as well as the impression of a personality of him to deliver the quote. In fact, in the printed portion of the book, Shakespeare in Pictures, there is even one section devoted exclusively to using Shakespeare intelligently during a job interview. And I have multiple reported evidence from readers of the Your Daily Shakespeare Dictionary about the effect of a Shakespearean quote at school, at work, or even in a political environment. The Internet video section of Shakespeare in Pictures book-internet combination contains 100 Shakespearean quotes, each linked to its own mnemonic frame. A mnemonic frame, quite simply, is a Shakespearean quote converted into a graphic picture, where the elements of the picture, of the mnemonic frame, that is, instantly and dramatically will impress the whole quote into the reader's mind, or with the internet, into the mind of the observer of the mnemonic frame. And I will give you some examples momentarily. There are actually two internet files connected with the internet part of the book. In one file, the written quote is first and its associated mnemonic frames comes next, and another file in which the mnemonic frames is first, followed by the quote to which that mnemonic frame is connected. Why two separate files? Simple. At the beginning, the user will need to see the quote first and of the corresponding mnemonic frame immediately afterwards, so as to associate in his mind words and pictures. But as he acquires familiarity with the system, he will seek for the mnemonic frame first, and from there he will associate the components of the mnemonic frame with the original quote. And here is a quick example, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And never has proverb been more pertinent. In the play Antony and Cleopatra, Cleopatra tells her assistant, "Those were my salad days when I was green in judgment," where Cleopatra recounts and recalls her errors and attributes them to her youth at the time when the error was committed. And here is the associated mnemonic frame. I chose it for this presentation because it is short and intuitive, which allows me to explain clearly and concisely the principle behind the mnemonic frame itself. As with most things that work and work efficiently, the principle is simple. And for that matter, it was actually Tolstoy who said, "Every important idea is simple." And by the way, the book, that is, the printed component of Shakespeare in Pictures, also describes the curious psychological history of memory, of which history the mnemonic frames could be considered the most current chapter, especially when converted into a valuable tool, both for conversation and for learning, thanks to the miracles of modern technology. Knowing their history is not strictly necessary in order to use the mnemonic frames contained in the internet files, but if I may, it is the type of knowledge which acts as a bright light shone on a partially obscured and neglected field. The neglected field, overlooked in schools and even universities, is memory, as if memory were not one of the most important assets that nature has granted to sentient beings. But to return to the example just shown, however easy this line may be, look at the mnemonic frame on the screen, halt the video with a click if you can, and repeat it in your mind the words of the quote, linking them with the components of the associated mnemonic frames. By the way, besides being shown on some channels in Portland, Oregon and other stations in the US, this video can also be found on the Shakespeare in Picture website, which will be displayed at the end of this program. Some of you may perhaps say to themselves, "But this is simple. I do not need a mnemonic frame to remember this quote." Of course, this particular example is simple, but I chose it purposely for its simplicity, and above all because I will use it as an experiment in which you yourself are the subject. But I think that you will find the value of the system dramatically good and valuable when you will have acquired, or I'd better say, incorporated in the safe box of your mind, 10, 20, 50 quotes or more. I use the analogy of a safe box because, however obvious it may be, our mind is a safe box, impervious to theft of any kind, both physical and ideological. Let pass maybe 1, maybe 2 days, and then try to recall the quote. Unless you wish to trick yourself in some way, you will probably find that, as you think of the quote, the first component of the associated mnemonic frame may be either the green block or the salad. At least this was the result in the many experiments I conducted with people while developing the Shakespeare in Pictures system. The third component of this particular mnemonic frame is the Final Judgment by Michelangelo, of course, a fresco located on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. And you will probably also note that if and when you will attempt to recall the quote, in your mind you will only need either the image of the salad or of the green patch to repeat the quote silently or aloud. The words "in judgment" will return to mind almost automatically. There is a logical, physiological reason for this, but I will not go into it because it would make this introductory video too long. Eventually, in your mind, there will be no longer a conscious distinction between the words and their associated mnemonic frame. However, the mnemonic frame will return almost spontaneously to your memory if, for whatever reason, the words of the quote may slip away from instant recollection. Try the experiment yourself. You will probably confirm the statistics that I just described. Without any effort of the will, it will be the mnemonic frame first that will come to your mind. And the reason for this is quite simple. We do think in pictures, and memory should be considered as an instrument rather than a function. And just like a musical instrument, practicing mnemonic frames will yield results very close in relative effect to those obtained when practicing a musical instrument. Besides, as mentioned, mnemonic frames are but one chapter in the long path of the history of memory. History that, in the relatively short time of which we have some reliable history, officially began with Simonides of Chios, who was a musician, a poet, and a singer from the island of Chios, not far from Athens, in the Aegean Sea, about 400 years before Christ. We could say that Simonides himself applied the principle of mnemonic frames, though of course without the aid of a computer to create them, which clearly was an obvious and great limitation or handicap. Besides, between then and now, mnemonic systems became more complicated and eventually mankind gave up. I am summarizing for expedience, but you may agree that some knowledge of the past helps us understand the present, even when we deal with our own memory. Yet, there is an even older, much older example of mnemonic frames in the history of mankind, and it has nothing to do with mythology. I am referring to the prehistoric cave paintings by primitive men found in the walls of caves, on the walls of caves. Those paintings are dramatic evidence of the concept on which the theory and practice of mnemonic frames is founded. I summarize quickly here, but there are more details in the printed version of Shakespeare in Pictures, which may help to know simply but analytically how our own memory functions. And just as with a car, knowing how the car works helps it work better and longer. Now, when we say "in the beginning was the Word" as a historical fact or as a quotation from religious or metaphysical texts, we are but stating that the Word is a mental device to make us think of the metaphysical, that is, of what can only be known by faith or inference. In more earthly terms, in what can be at least archaeologically proven, in the beginning in the beginning were not words as such, but paintings, prehistoric painting, that is, paintings of which we know nothing about the painters other than they obviously were humans. And here we talk about 10,000 to 50,000 years ago or more. That is, from this point of view, which is factual and not metaphysical, those prehistoric paintings were the actual visual representation of our ancestors' perceptions. It is probable that the subjects represented by those primitive images were already connected with specific sounds, and in time those sounds acquired an even more specific, a more specialized meaning, what we called a word or words. And as the sounds became more specialized, they became symbolic. That is, one word could define not only one object, but thousands of objects with similar characteristics. For example, when we say the word chair, we assume that the term applies to any object similar in appearance and function to what, in our mind, is an imagined notion of a chair. And I say imagined because the chair that is described by the spoken or written word chair varies with each person's identification of a chair. Now, returning to the relationship between words and sounds and between words and images, there is abundant evidence that our memory contains a much larger volume of information than we are aware of. And in general, we assume that our memory consists of what we want to remember. For example, a telephone number or an address or anything else. However, much of our spontaneous memory or mnemonic power is beyond our control. And this is confirmed by a multitude of examples of which we ourselves are the subject. Often, a memory that we thought we had completely forgotten comes to mind without any apparent cause or prompting or any link to what we may have been thinking at the moment. With music, the phenomenon is similar and equally intriguing. For generations now, it is possible to listen to recorded music while driving in cars. First there were tapes, then CDs, and now USB keys. All can contain a large volume of music, be they songs or classical pieces. In these storage systems, musical pieces are separated from one another by a short interval. And if you pay attention, after you have listened repeatedly to the same set of pieces, you will notice that when a piece ends, your mind anticipates the notes of the following tune. And by anticipating, I mean that the mind will play those notes silently, which sounds like a paradox, but there is no other way to express that notion. The mind almost instinctively begins to play the notes of the following new tune, or the following tune or piece. Not only the tune, but the interplay of the instruments, the timing, the intervals, and this without any willful effort to do so. It is as if the memory is temporarily controlling our mind. I refer to the musical example not only to demonstrate, I hope, that this phenomenon, that is instantaneous, spontaneous memory recollection of forgotten memories in some cases, or of as yet to be played musical pieces, is a well-known phenomenon. Now, mnemonic frames represent but an extension of a general phenomenon. Namely, our memory contains and can contain much more information than we realize. But with mnemonic frames, you can manage and direct your memory profitably and, I would say, amusingly, to build an arsenal of verbal weapons delivered with advantage to drive your friends into action and your enemies into despair. The fact that in schools and education in general memorization is frowned upon is both an outrage committed against common sense and a gross misunderstanding of the value of memory in learning. Irrational cultivation of memory is not only valuable, but even entertaining. It was Shakespeare himself who, in the play The Taming of the Shrew, has a character say, "No profit grows where is no pleasure taken." And mnemonic frames achieve just that, namely to convert what may be otherwise considered a tedious effort into an amusing play. I suggest and hope that we do not and should not succumb and subscribe to the belief that fashion alone should dominate opinion. Because when fashion alone dominates opinion, it makes thought unnecessary and puts the highest intelligence within the reach of everyone, which is ironic, of course. But it is not intelligent. At best, it is parroting. For fashion in its essence is imitating or complying with an imposed model, and the results are evident, visible, and palpable everywhere. From questionable vaccines imposed to cure questionable pandemics, to politicians and sometimes even presidents, of whom Shakespeare would say, "He is drunk many times a day, and many days entirely drunk." And to many other politicians of whom Shakespeare would say that they ride the tide of pomp that beats upon the high shores of the world, though they are the lyingest knaves in Christendom. You can purchase both books, the Shakespearean Dictionary and Shakespeare in Pictures, online at Amazon. The dictionary is heavy because it attempts to be complete. 1,400 pages, £3 plus, the work of 15 years. If you wish to get both Your Daily Shakespeare and Shakespeare in Pictures at the same time, please email your request to this email address and you will receive a good discount. Thank you for watching, and as Shakespeare would say, and I repeat, may all the number of the stars give light to your fair way. Good night.